evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are around the world. We are delighted that you could join us for this consultative roundtable on gender and science. My name's Grace Mwaura. I'm just going to give you a few housekeeping rules about this webinar and how we are going to interact for the next 2 hours. After that, I'll hand over to my colleague to welcome you officially to this webinar, and we shall move on. So I want to take you through a few instructions. Next slide, please, about how we are going to be communicating. Please use the chat box to let us know of any information, especially technical challenges that you may have. Also use the question tab to ask any questions. So if you have a question, post it on the question tab. If you have a technical issue, post on the chat box. I also want to take you through some instructions about how we are going to be using an exciting platform called Mentimeter. Next slide, please. On this slide, you will see some instructions on using Mentimeter, which I will introduce to you on the next slide. It is a platform that is going to open on your browser. So if you're using your computer, be ready to open a browser where you can access this. If you're using your phone, it's still possible to have GoToWebinar in the background as you use your browser on your phone. So now get ready. On my next slide, I want to know where you're all coming from. I would like you to, next slide, please. I would like you to type in www.menti.com. Next slide. We're also going to post a link on the chat box on how you can access this particular link. Next slide, please. Wycliffe, I'm waiting on you to show me a screen with a code for Mentimeter. It seems we are having, yes, there it is. I hope now attendees can see this link. You can either use the link on your chat box. So if you look at your chat box, there's a link that we have posted. You can also type the link that you're seeing on the screen right now onto your browser and use the highlighted code. And you will see a question where we are asking you what city you're joining us from. Apologies for that hiccup, but we just love to know where you're coming from. So if you have opened that link, you should be seeing a question on Menti and you should be responding to that. Olivia, how are you doing with this? Would you like to present the results?
Yes, if you share your screen, I can present the results. If you let me share my screen.
Kindly share your screen, Olivia, so that we can see where our attendees are joining from.
Can you see my screen? The answers are coming in.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I can see we have participants from Cape Town, from Nigeria, from Palo Alto, California. Thank you very much for those responses. We can see we are quite a diverse team that is on board, and we hope we'll be able to engage you through the next 2 hours on figuring out what we need to be prioritizing as far as enhancing gender equity in science in Africa is concerned. You can keep your responses coming, and we'll keep this slide and share with you later on. So thank you very much. As I said, my name is Grace. I'll now move to the background and I'll invite my colleague, the Director of Strategy at Partnerships at the African Academy of Sciences, who is the host for this webinar this evening, to welcome you and to have us run for the next session. Over to you, Isavani, and next slide, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Grace, and welcome to all of the participants. Good morning to those that are joining from Africa, and some of us are joining also from the States, and good evening to others. So today's expert consultative roundtable on gender and science is part of a process that we're undertaking, funded through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to work with experts on the continent to engage with the people in the know to identify priorities that need further investment from African governments and international partners going forward through various platforms, including the Coalition for African Research and Innovation, the soon-to-be announced African Education, Science, Technology and Innovation Fund, and other advocacy instruments for engagement and investment in science. So this roundtable is being hosted by the African Academy of Sciences, and we just wanted to give you a short overview of the introduction to the African Academy of Sciences. Next slide, Wycliffe. So the African Academy of Sciences is a non-aligned, non-for-profit African organization which is headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, but is a pan-African organization that recognizes excellent scientists and through its fellowship program, but also young and upcoming scientists through its affiliates program and through its grant-making platform, supports the science ecosystem, science research and development ecosystem in Africa. It is the only continental academy in Africa, and it enjoys a close working relationship and the support of and recognition of the African Union Development Agency, and with joint programs with both with AUDA and NEPAD, several African governments and major international funding agencies. So the vision of the Academy is transformed life through science. And what we do as an Academy is we have a three-part mandate of recognizing excellence of the fellows, many of whom have joined in this consultative roundtable and many others. We also support programs through our platform, the Alliance for Accelerating Science in Africa, which is a continental platform that supports researchers, rising research leaders, develops critical research gaps that need to be addressed on the continent, but very importantly, building this ecosystem of science so that we can address the various challenges that we face as a continent, as outlined in the continental program of the African Union Development, of the African Union Commission. And so this exercise is to assist us to better understand what are the priority areas where we need to provide support as a continental academy, and where we need to then seek investment from African governments and international partners for support. The next slide, please, Wycliffe. So this roundtable on setting scientific priorities for Africa is really important and urgent, as we recognize with the current pandemic, the resources that are going to be available for investment in science are not going to grow, they're going to be limited. And in Africa, this is already constrained. So understanding exactly where you need to be putting this investment is key. So the African Academy of Sciences is working with our continental partner, the African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD, and engaging scientific leaders in Africa through this consultative process to review the priorities in various areas and assist us to engage, discuss, and learn on how we can address the continental agenda 2063 that I mentioned, the Sustainable Development Agenda, and the key messages and the key pillars of the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy of Africa. So these scientific priorities then will be used by the Academy in this partnership with AUDA for advocacy for greater investments, as I've already alluded to. We've already undertaken an exercise in 2019 on the four areas listed: climate change and environment, biospecimen data, governance, human genetics and genomics, and maternal, neonatal, and child health. And in this year, we'll be undertaking these the priorities listed on the right, which is around epidemic preparedness. We've already released a paper on the research and development priorities, and there will be an ongoing engagement around how we seek investment in those areas. We've done the food and nutrition security has already been undertaken, and this consultative roundtable is on gender and science, and the next one we will be undertaken will be later in the year, will be in mental health. Also to note that in 2021 we will be continuing a further process and also engaging with our partners to identify which are some of the areas that maybe are not included in these two sets that need to be included going forward. So we really would like you to participate very actively, because it's about what you know, what knowledge you bring into the table, about diving in deeper into this roundtable that we are in today on gender and science. So the knowledge is not for us to just share with you, but also to share the knowledge that you are bringing to the table. This is very important, and that's why it's a consultative roundtable. So we really look forward to your participation, active participation through the questions in the chat box, as Grace has alluded to, but also participating in the Mentimeter survey. So now I want to hand up the next slide, please. I want to continue by introducing the objectives for this meeting. So what we're wanting to do here is for you to come together, and we've got a diverse group of experts from all, the areas in the slide, various different countries in Africa, and people from other parts of the world. And what we want you to do is to contribute to these research and development priorities for Africa. And so your contribution is to participate again and make sure that when we do also share information with you post this, if you could give your feedback, that would be very much appreciated as well. Because these priorities, following this, we would want to get further engagement, and through the process, what we would like to do is to make sure that as diverse, and if you need to share it with your colleagues, that would also be important, so that we can get a broader range of input into this consultative process. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce a great friend of Africa and African herself, Kadesi Tesfiogores, who leads the Global Partnerships and Grand Challenges team within the Discovery and Translational Sciences program at the Melinda Gates Foundation, to give the welcoming remarks. And thereafter, I will hand over to Professor Rosen Diab, who is the Director of Gender Insight, which is a gender science and technology innovation and engineering section of the World Academy of Sciences, which is based in Trieste. And I'll hand over to you, Kadesi, to give the opening remarks.
Okay, can you hear me? I hope.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for a good introduction of the initiative, Isivani. I'm delighted to help be part of this meeting and kicking it off on an important issue for all of us, for the entire world, on gender and science in Africa. This continues to be a challenging time for all of us, for so many around the world. And I appreciate everyone taking the time to join this important discussion. I hope you all are keeping safe and staying healthy. We are in Seattle in our foundation headquarters, and we've been working from home since March, showing how this epidemic is really turning everybody's world inside out, really. As you have heard from Isavani, this initiative that we're talking about is coordinated by the African Academy of Science and Auda Nepad. And a very important part of identifying and prioritization exercise of the top 10 to 15 scientific challenges, if solved, could change the lives of African citizens in a positive way. Of course, absolutely delighted as one of those identified areas as gender. And as Isavani has said, my name is Kadestas Fegurgis. I lead the foundation effort in global partnership and the Grand Challenges program itself. One of our mandate is to be an enabler and supporter of all of you, your cheerleaders of all the local institutions and scientists and science diplomats. So science can reach its full potential and can be the tool of change to help African citizens. A big part of our work and something that I'm personally very passionate about is helping to ensure that the people who know best, the people who are close to the problem and are experts in any of these fields are the center of the agenda setting and of the scientific agenda. So in this context, African scientists and African women scientists this exercise and part of the decision making of what's going to be important. There's still nowhere on earth, unfortunately, that women are equal to men. And Africa is obviously no exception of this. Although we're seeing a lot of progress in African countries, still remains gender parity remains a big agenda. It is also troubling to see everywhere how the pandemic is exacerbating gender inequities, among other inequities, making it an important part of our collective work. COVID has shown everywhere, even in rich countries like the United States, that no one is immune to this. Low-income communities, communities of color, and most, as we all know, women are most affected by any epidemic, by any health crisis, and by any emergencies. So COVID is no exception, unfortunately. The quarantine measures that are taken in every single country, even here in the United States, show that women are affected more than men. The maternal mortality rate will be affecting by COVID once again. So it's in all our advantage and our favor to make sure that women voices are represented, but most importantly, that women leaders are part of the decision-making table and that women are in charge and part of the solution. So very excited to see this priority setting exercise. So coming back to today, the scientific field is not immune to gender inequity. We know that we don't have enough women scientists around the world. We definitely don't have enough women African scientists. So we just need to make sure that we do everything in our part to uplift women, to support women, so they are part of the decision making, that they are part of the process, and when the decisions are made, that women perspective are included. So we remain committed to making sure that women, girls' voices are continue to be part of our agenda. So all to say, I'm delighted to be here, very excited to learn from you, to listen, and to make sure that what I listen, I go back and incorporate into my own work and continue to support you as your enabler, your cheerleader, and your support system. So thanks for having me. Looking forward to be part of the process and to learn from all of you. Thank you. Back to you, Isavani.
Thank you, Kadest, for setting the scene as well. Thank you to Ezevani. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon and morning. As a fellow of the African Academy of Science, I really think that this is an important part of what fellows do, is get involved in these scientific conversations, and there can be nothing that can be more important at this point in this pandemic. Gender. I think it's a very poignant reminder of how important this gender conversation is, and I'm really looking forward to having this discussion with many of the experts who have joined us. I see we've got over 50 participants, so it's really great. We're looking forward to hearing from all of you. I think one of the reasons why I was asked to be one of the moderators on this session, this roundtable this afternoon, is because I'm currently directing an international initiative which is known as Gender Insight. The SITE stands for Science, Innovation, Technology and Engineering. And as Ezevani said, this is an initiative which is based in Trieste in Italy. It falls under the World Academy of Sciences, TWAS. And TWAS is like a global equivalent of the African Academy of Sciences. And many of the AAS fellows are likewise fellows of TWAS. And basically what Gender Insight is, it's a program which is situated at the nexus of gender, development, and science and technology, engineering and innovation. So in that sense, it's quite unique, and what we aim to do is to promote the role of women, not only in terms of getting the numbers of women up and that they have equal participation to men, but also to apply a gender lens, recognizing that men and women are differently affected by development, and it's very important for us to consider the perspectives of both the men and the women. And we would argue that by including both the men and women and including a gender lens, that the development outcomes are more effective and more sustainable in the long run. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot from me during the afternoon, so I'm not going to dwell too long on this. But I think just a very warm welcome from me to all of you, and I'm looking forward to our roundtable, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity for everyone to make their voices heard. It's really important. So let me pass over to Alan and ask Alan if she can lead the first engagement session. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Rosianne, and thank you for setting the tone for our meeting. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon from Nairobi, and rather afternoon in Nairobi, and whatever time of day where you're joining us from, you're welcome. So we are going to have a round of questions in the Mentimeter. The link to the questions, next slide, Wycliffe, yes. The link to the Mentimeter has been posted in the chat room, if you can follow that. This is another link from the first one, because we want the link for the cities to stay open. People can update as they join. There are two questions. So our first question, and all the questions, we will be using the next link that has been posted in the chat room, or you could type in www.menti.com and use this code that's been highlighted. Olivia will give.
Thank you.
Yes, Olivia will give you instructions on how long it takes to answer each question.
Thank you, Alan. So for the first question, you'll have 1 minute to give your responses, starting now. So once you're done, please just submit your answers and hold on for the next slide for the next question.
Please do remember to submit your response, because otherwise we won't see what your response was.
You have 25 seconds to submit before it closes. We are closing in the next 10 seconds, so we hope you are all submitting your answers. And voting closes now. So we'll now move to the next question. For this one, again, I hope you can see it. Question 2.1, again, you have 1 minute starting now to submit. You can see the answers coming in. You have 33 more seconds. Voting closes in 5 seconds. Okay, and now we move to the final question in this set, question 2.2, and you have 1 minute, 30 seconds, beginning now.
Olivia, you need to open the question for voting, please.
It is open. Question 2.2.
Okay, yeah, it is.
Twenty-five more seconds to submit your answers. Okay, and we are closing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for participating in this first engagement. As you can see, this pandemic has really changed the way we are doing things. We would be chatting face to face, but now we have to do this online, but we do hope you enjoy the experience. I would like to invite Rosiane again to set the scene and contextualize issues relating to gender, women, and science in Africa. Rosiane, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alan. So this is really strange not being able to see my audience, but let's go through this. So the topic I'm going to talk about is just to set the scene, women, gender and science in Africa. May I have the next slide, please, Wycliffe? So just some background to recap what Isavani said, and that is that the African Academy of Science has had a focus on women in science for some time. They've already conducted a study, and they have a gender working group, which is chaired by Catherine Ngilo, who's on the call this afternoon. So welcome to Catherine. What the goal of this roundtable or exercise is, as Isavani explained, is to define the priorities for gender in science in Africa. And we're doing this through a consultative process. We've got a variety of experts who are on the call this afternoon, and we're hoping that by the end of this afternoon's conversation, we will have some suggestions from all our experts. These priority areas are then going to be synthesized amongst the Secretariat and further developed. And then there will be various engagements with key stakeholders who may include policymakers in the continent and abroad, funding partners, some scientists, and hopefully by the end of it, we will have a suite of AAS projects that we could go to funders with and actually implement. May I have the next slide, please? All right, so let's start with some definitions to make sure that we are all talking and understanding the concepts from the same page. So you often hear gender being talked about, but at the same time, I think it's important that we go back and define what is the difference between sex and gender. So sex essentially is a biological concept. It's based on body characteristics. And traditionally, sex is binary, so you have male and female, although we do know that now there can be some non-binary categories. We have people who are intersex, and they have a combination of male and female body characteristics. Gender, on the other hand, is a social and cultural rather than a biological concept. So it's how you feel about yourself. It's your personal awareness of your own gender, how you think about yourself. Again, traditionally, this has been binary, so it's been man or woman or masculine or feminine. And we find that the majority of people identify as either a man or a woman, but it's important to understand that there are actually a range of possibilities between the two, and that gender is on a spectrum. May I have the next slide, please? A few more definitions before we go into some of the other context setting. When we talk about gender equality, this means that we're treating men and women equally, or that it requires that women and men can have equal enjoyment of certain things, such as socially valued goods, equal enjoyment of opportunities, of rewards and resources. Gender equity is something different. This is the process of being fair to both men and women. And if we want to ensure fairness, then one must have strategies and measures available to compensate for the historical and social disadvantages that women have always faced. So they're not coming from a level playing field. Women have often suffered some injustices in the past, and if we're going to get equality, then we have to make sure that the process is fair to both men and women. And equity is something that would lead to gender equality. Women's empowerment is a term that's often heard because this is a very critical aspect of promoting gender equality, and this is what focuses on identifying and redressing the power imbalances that we see around us. And this is a cartoon that shows trying to depict what the difference between equality and equity is. So on the left-hand side, equality means treating everyone equally, and if you can imagine that the child there is the women, obviously they're disadvantaged. So what one needs is something termed equity, where you give them all an equal chance to enjoy what they see before this. And so this means putting in place some measures to allow women to become equal. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is it important that we have a gender perspective, that we don't just talk about women? Because gender equality is not just about women. I'll be interested to see what you all responded to that question that was asked about how important is it to have men in the conversation. I didn't see the response to that, but hopefully we'll get it later in the meeting. Gender has become a catch-all term. It's used to describe a whole range of issues in an apolitical way. Some people think it's only about women's needs, but it's not. It's about the unequal social relationships that exist between women and men. And these social relationships are often synonymous with a power relationship. So what we find is that we get less effective policies, institutions, and processes if we don't take the gender perspective, which means that we're going to not get the transformation that we need, and we're not going to get the social change that is necessary. It's really important that we understand what the needs of men and women are. My program that I run really emphasizes that it's important that we hear the voices of both men and women, and we look at both of their perspectives so that we can get the most effective outcomes. So working for sustainability presents an opportunity to not only acknowledge the global inequalities and the unequal power relations, but to challenge these inequalities and so contribute to social and gender transformation. A reminder that gender attributes are socially constructed, so that means that they can be changed. Society can change, it can become more just and equitable because these gender attributes are a social construct. Next slide, please. Why is it important to apply a gender lens? Well, because men and women are affected differently by development. They're affected differently by the implementation of policies. And it's only through the application of a gender lens that you will know what these differences are. It's very important for the vision and the concerns and abilities of both men and women to be taken into account. And we would hope that through the application of a gender lens, we would get more effective, equitable, and longer-term outcomes and policies. So even in one's research, it's always important to apply that gender lens. Fine, go to the next slide. So now just some statistics. The World Economic Forum every year publishes a global gender gap report. This is some statistics from the 2018 report. The 2020 report is out, and I'll just refer to how these figures have changed. So if you look at the 149 countries that were reported on in 2018, there were only 3 African countries that appeared in the top 20% of all the countries. Rwanda was 6th, Namibia was 10th, South Africa was 19th. In the latest report, the 2021, Rwanda dropped a few places, Namibia also dropped a couple of places, and South Africa went up 2 places. But those are the only 3 African countries that feature in the top 20%. And quite alarmingly, if you look at the bottom 20%, half of the countries are from Africa. And when they're measuring this gender gap, the gender gap index benchmarks national gender gaps on 4 criteria. They cover economics, education, health, and politics. So across the board, Africa is not looking too good, so we've got a long way to go. Next slide, please. Wycliffe, can we have the next? There we are. So this is a summary of the Global Gender Gap Index by region, again for 2018. And in most cases, the 2020 statistics show that there's been an improvement by about 1%. But if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, sitting down there at a global gender gap index of 66%. So we've still got quite a long way to go. Not quite as bad as the Middle East and North Africa, which is faring the worst, but quite a lot less than Western Europe and North America. Next slide, please. I'd like to refer you to a publication that was put out by UNESCO called Cracking the Code, Girls and Women's Education in STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics, which shows that globally only 35% of STEM students in higher education are women. I don't think this is unexpected. It's something that we all know. We're very familiar with this. The differences, but there are some striking differences within the STEM disciplines. For example, only 3% of female students in higher education choose to do ICT studies. And this is probably one of the fields where you get the lowest number of women. So this gender gap is really quite alarming, particularly as you think about the future of jobs and the future of work, and the fact that ICT studies, what's going to be driving innovation, social well-being, inclusive growth, and sustainable development. So the statistics are not great. Next slide. This is the all familiar scissors graph that I think many of you will be familiar with. Again, it's based on UNESCO statistics. And what you see here is that, I'm not sure if my pointer works, but at bachelor's level, the women outnumber the men just slightly. At master's degree level, the women outnumber the men in terms of percentages. But then as we go higher up, we see the gap widening, that the women are less than the men when it comes to doctoral degree success. And when it comes to researchers, we all know that women researchers average about 30% globally. So a very, very wide gap when we come to the top. Next slide, please. This is a map showing the gender gap in science. Women as a share of total researchers. It's quite old data, but I think basically what it's showing is that over Africa, we've got a lot of this dark blue color rather than the pink. So the women as a share are less than 40% in many, many countries. Next slide, please. I just want to give two slides on the digital gender divide, because this is something that's so important in our modern economy. The drivers or the drivers for this digital gender divide, which we all know exists, is the lack of access. Women are less likely than men to have access to a smartphone. Another driver is affordability. Women don't have the same education in STEM or ICT. There are biases. Sometimes they can be unconscious biases. Sometimes they are inherent biases that preclude women from entering these fields. There are social cultural norms that count against women's participation. Women have limited use of experience of using digital tools, and a scarcer presence or activity on platforms which are for business purposes, for example. So the potential for widening of the gap and having greater inequality is actually increasing as we go into the digital economy. How can we address this digital gender divide? Well, through policy that can reverse trends. We need to raise awareness and tackle gender stereotypes that we all know exist. Get better access and more affordable access to digital tools and remove the barriers. And I think the final comment is that narrowing the digital gender divide, and perhaps narrowing any gender divide, is not just about fixing the women, but it's rather about fixing the system, the systemic factors that prevent women from actively participating, and putting in place concrete policy actions so that they're able to fully participate and we have an inclusive digital economy. This is my final slide, and it's my favorite slide. It relates to the household gender gap, but I think really what it shows us is that although the statistics show us that working women, even if they are equal in so many ways, they do much more housework than working men. And importantly, what people are finding with the younger generation, where the men are taking an increasingly larger role in the family situation, caring of children and household duties, it's still the women who assume that extra burden of the household worry work, keeping track of what needs to be done in the household. And this is what often makes it really difficult for women to compete easily on an equitable basis. And I just love this slide, because to see these women in their high heel shoes and tight skirts and all these obstacles and hurdles in front of them, I think just displays to us and portrays how difficult it is in this race that we're all facing. So let me close there and pass over to Alan or Grace, who's going to take us through the next engagement session. Thank you.
Rosiane, thank you. Before you get off, I'd like to, first of all, thank you very much for a very articulate presentation. It does highlight the challenges as well as some of the solutions you've alluded to. Can I request that you speak a little bit more about the system issues that are affecting the different gender, and how you think we can address that practically, from a practical perspective? How do we address that so that we break that cycle?
Okay, so I think, Alan, thanks for that question. You know, so often you hear of interventions which are focused on women. We need to mentor women. We need to find role models for women. We need to fix the women so that they can aspire to whatever it might be, leadership positions, that they can be present in greater numbers in STEM fields and so on. But you know, it's not only about that. It's not about fixing the women always. It's often about fixing the institutions. So if you think of a situation that we'll all be familiar with, we've all come through universities. So often it's the university, the institution, that is not conducive to the transformation that's needed for women. And so one needs to look at the institutional climate to see whether they've got policies in place to encourage women, whether there are certain challenges that women are facing because they're in that environment, and just the general institutional climate. So one needs to put in place policies, institutional policies, the systemic things, rather than only focusing on women. I'm not saying one doesn't have to do mentoring and role modeling and all that, but often there are systemic issues that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rosiane. And yes, speaking about systems, I think it's also important to address the issue on unconscious bias within the system, and how institutions, for instance, can try to, you know, safeguard against that, or actually put procedures in place that question when people make decisions and whether or not they are being biased, you know, they are gender biased. If you could speak to that as well, that would be great. Can I request the attendees to please post questions on the question forum or in the chat? We will read them out to Rosiane, but please do go ahead and speak to that.
Yeah, I think, you know, unconscious bias is something that has really come to the fore of late. And there have been some really interesting research on that. I think the best I've ever seen is where, oh, my memory fades me a little bit, but it was something to do with, it was, I think it was something to do with concert pianists. And when the people were interviewing for some position and the panel knew that it was men or women, the men all succeeded and the women didn't. But when they did it without them knowing whether it was a man or a woman who was playing the piano, a completely different result came about. So I think there's no doubt that unconscious bias is something that women do face. I think it's also something that you know, other categories also face. I think it's a factor faced by Black people. I think it's something that certain ethnic groups experience. Perhaps even age isn't important. So all these intersectionality issues are very, very important. And I think, you know, we need to be aware of unconscious bias because and guard against it at all costs, because it really impacts on the careers and lives of women.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rosiane. Before we move to the next engagement session, I'd really like you to also speak to the digitalization and the girl child, and what when you talk about narrowing the digital gender divide and fix, you know, what does that exactly mean? What should be the actual activities or tools that should be put in place to narrow that divide?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's really of grave concern, because if you look at all the STEM fields, this is the one where it's probably the worst, computer science, IT fields. It's even more serious than it is in physics and chemistry and so on. So I think, you know, the first thing we've got to really address is getting more girls into the field. So right at school level, and there are many interventions that various organizations have been putting in place about, you know, coding for girls and so on. But it's so important that girls realize that this is a career opportunity. It's something that they mustn't think is only for boys. Whether there's been some research that suggests that because boys, when they're younger, tend to do a lot of playing on computer games and all that kind of thing, that they naturally sort of move towards that field. I think it's also related to the fact that many of the IT people come out of engineering, electronic engineering. Also something, you know, women are not in high numbers in engineering. So it's absolutely critical to address it at high school level, to look at the numbers that are entering into the universities and the numbers that are graduating, because we're not going to solve this problem at the upper end if we don't solve the pipeline issues. So it's critical right throughout. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rosiane. We do appreciate your responses. And I think it is critical, as you've mentioned, to think about the pipeline and to think about how to grow the pipeline over time, and not just look at the dwindling numbers at advanced stages. Thank you for that. I would like to invite Rosiane to now come and introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Monica Idenoba from the African Union Commission, where she's a Principal Scientific Officer in the Department of Human Resources, Science and Technology. She is from West Africa. She has a background in agroclimatology and vast experience. Monica, we're really looking forward to your talk. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Roseanne. Good evening, dear participants, and thanks to the African Academy of Science for inviting the African Union Commission to share with us the kind of policy instruments that are being implemented at continental level, which tends to advance gender equity in science, technology, and innovation. Colleagues, while gender equity refers to fairness of treatment for women and men, we all know there is yet to be equity for women in science, technology, and innovation. And no wonder we still have statements like, this is the first woman, in this field making news all around the world, once a woman, is the first person in a discipline. So you will permit me this evening, to focus on women, because this is the group mostly impacted in Africa for several reasons, which I will try to enumerate in this discussion. We must also bear in mind that the realities of gender equity in science, technology, and innovation will vary from country to country, and so solutions will also vary. While I was preparing for this meeting, I took a look at the current statistics of the UIS fact sheet for the African continent, which clearly reveals that the journey is still far in regards to the engagement of women in science, technology, and innovation, even though a lot of efforts are being put in place at national, regional, and their continental levels. Looking at this fact sheet, you will see that the gender gap in science has not changed much over the years. Women still account as minority in global research, but for Africa in particular, many of the nations of Africa are still falls below 40%, maybe with the exception of a few countries like Tunisia, South Africa, Egypt, Mauritius, Sudan, and Central African Republic. So if we imagine that the female-male population ratio in Africa is about 50-50, then we need to aspire for inclusion of more women in science, technology, and innovation. For countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, which are the most populated countries in Africa, the population of women in science stands at 23% and 13% for Nigeria and Ethiopia respectively, which does not in any way align to the total population ratios of these countries. In Africa, there's a declining interest in STEM subjects across almost all the countries, particularly for girls and women. This lack of interest are as a result of several factors: social norms, religious, cultural, traditional practices, ineffective policies, poor infrastructure, among others. These, to my knowledge, are mainly the factors that are the real bottlenecks that needs to be overhauled to enable the participation and enhance the interest of more girls and women in science, technology, and innovation, and also strengthen their functionality even when qualified as scientists. Speaking of the institutional climate that Roseanne talked about a few moments ago, it quickly reminded me of my experience some years back at an international organization that sponsored my PhD degree in agriculture. For those who are familiar with agricultural research, we know it can be very tasking. I had to set up experimental fields, collect data, analyze, and of course, publish. At the same time, at that moment, I also decided that I wanted to get married, following the pressures from my parents who constantly reminded me that women have a limited time limit, after which suitors will cease to come or even after which you may have difficulties in having children. So here I was in between research and starting a family. And to worsen it, my non-African male supervisor in that international organization said to me, "It is a stupid decision to be doing research and thinking of marriage." I emphasized the international status of that institution and the non-African to buttress the fact that gender challenges and biases are across board, whether Africa or otherwise, local, national, and international. It is the fact that the supervisor understood the difficult tasks of agricultural research, which as a woman I veered into. And looking at it from the perspective of women being the weaker sex, it is the same woman who is in research who will at the same time take care of the domestic needs of her home. Yet, yes, the facts were there, but were these facts enough to deter me from pursuing my dreams? So I went ahead to get married, continued with my research. I must confess here that it was very stressful. The stress I faced was unimaginable, as I had to work extra hard to prove my supervisor wrong. In a short while, I had a baby. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, Monica, we hear you well, but you could also try and turn a bit so that we can see your face. Thank you.
Oh I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you see my face now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I went ahead to get married. I continued my research, and the stress I faced was just unimaginable, as I had to work extra hard to prove my supervisor wrong. In a short while, I had a baby. Again, the challenges expanded, as I had to take my child from when she was just 3 weeks old. I had to take her to work and even had to travel on field trip, which my supervisor insisted I must be part of. My PhD funding was time-bound, and of course, the agricultural cycle must be respected. Otherwise, I could lose the season and I lose the year. So there was no provision for a daycare. I had to keep my baby with a nanny all day at the Institute Center for Golfers, just to ensure that I was close enough to my baby. Imagine the limited stress and work productivity I would have had to achieve per day if the institution had in fact set mechanisms in place for nursing mothers. Today, many aspiring women scientists are faced with the burden of thinking about the challenges their gendered identity could pose along the way. And in some cases, they opt for more women-friendly sectors, if there's anything like that. The second story I would want to highlight here is the unconscious biases that I experienced when I applied for a job as a young girl in another international institution many years ago. During the interview, I was the only lady, and I beat all the male counterparts that came for the interview. But my supervisor insisted no, that he was not going to take me because one, I was young, secondly, I was a lady, and he didn't think that I would be capable of doing the field work. And of course, with the insistence of the human resource team who said, I mean, you can't leave somebody who came first and pick, another person because, they are male. So I was offered the job. This was a job that was supposed to be a permanent position. But because they were convinced that, I will not be able to cope as a lady, and secondly, I was very young, they decided to give me a 6-month trial. And of course, I had to work extra hard to prove them wrong. And I remained on that position for 5 years until I decided to resign on my own volition. We are faced with several gender stereotypes every day in our communities and places of work. The stories I have just shared with you are not peculiar to me alone. So many young women pursuing careers in science are all aware that there are gender inequalities and infrastructural limitations to their gendered needs that limit them from achieving their highest potential and effectively contributing to the development challenges. We have had mothers advise their daughters not to study engineering because it is a field for men. Yet service to humanity is without borders or gender controls. To get fulfillment in life, you have to challenge the norms by stepping into the field where you have been called and not where people think you fit best because of your sex. I brought out these examples for us as scientists and policymakers to grasp the magnitude of the challenges we face. If we must achieve gender equity, we need to focus on creating enabling environments for our fellow women and female children. In our positions as change makers, we need to prove to our daughters that being a girl or a woman is not a limitation. They can and should venture into any field of interest. We need gender-friendly policies and environments at workplaces, in schools, religious centers, laboratories, etc. If we must evolve and involve more women as scientists, we as women scientists must begin to influence policies that should favor women at workplace. We need work-family balance, policies that enable us as women to return back to work after adequate time of nursing a child, policies that enable women to work from home, gender-sensitive policies that allow women to advance in their careers, and institutional policies that do not discriminate what kind of a job is suitable for a lady when hired. Recognizing all these challenges, the African governments have taken concrete measures over the years to involve and support more women and girls in science. For example, the African Union has a strategic framework called the Agenda 2063, which is a roadmap for socio-economic transformation of the continent in the next 50 years. Agenda 2063 lists 7 aspirations for Africa, none of which is achievable without quality, inclusiveness, and informative education, training, as well as science, technology, and innovation. About 46% of the increase in African labor force over the period of 2015 and 2063 will constitute young people of ages 15 to 34, who would need access to obtaining basic secondary, tertiary level skills that will unlock their potentials for innovation, inventiveness, entrepreneurship, employability, and to become responsible citizens. So a key priority area of the Agenda 2063 is to build African human capacity through prioritization of higher education, skill development, and investment in science, research, and innovation. Hence, the Union, through his commission, elaborated several strategies for Africa, and few of them are the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa, which is popularly called the STISA 2024. This was adopted in 2024 to drive Agenda 2063, emphasizing on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in fields. To close up the gaps in STI in the continent, and then, of course, enable the wealth creation for all. The second strategy, which was also developed towards the implementation of Agenda 2063, is the Continental Education Strategy for Africa. This strategy operates in clusters, mindful of the needs in the continent. And so we have clusters which cater for early childhood education and development. We have a cluster on women and girls. We have a cluster on STEM, another cluster on ICT in education, curriculum, teachers development, higher education, peace education, TVET, life skills, and career guidance. The purpose of all these clusters is to have a coalition of stakeholders who will deal with the issues surrounding these clusters to harmonize functional and enabling spaces for social development. We all know that when there are cases of insecurity, girls and women are mostly affected. Hence the importance of peace education. And it's around these clusters that I have just enumerated that I think the African Academy of Sciences could align itself with. A couple of instruments have been put in place to implement these strategies. For instance, in 2004, the African Heads of States endorsed the establishment and the operationalization of the African Union International Center for Girls and Women's Education in Africa. This center is located in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, as an institution that promotes education of girls and women in Africa. Although most of the activities for this center kicked off in 2017. As a specialized institution of the African Union, the role of this institution is to provide necessary policies, frameworks, strategies, and relevant stakeholders with the African Union member states, civil societies, and other development partners to address gender equality. Through a particular focus on gender equality, gender-sensitive learning, teaching environments, the African Union Center for International Girls contributes to ensuring quality education for girls and also increasing access and retention of girls in the educational system in Africa. So this center also contributes to the achievement of the Aspiration 6 of the Agenda 2063, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of the African people, particularly its women and youth, and caring for children. So more specifically, Goal 17 of Aspiration 16, focuses on full gender equality in all spheres of life, and it pushes for the elimination of all barriers to quality education, health, social services for women and girls in the coming years. So since January 2019, the center is implementing its second phase of its 3-year strategic plan, which focuses on 4 strategic axes in line with Pillar 3 of the Continental Education Strategy for Africa. And these are gender equity, equality, sensitivity throughout education and training system. In order to optimize efforts which are the most needed and which will have the highest impact on girls and women's education in Africa, the African Union SAFA is focusing its policy advocacy efforts on 4 strategic priorities, namely, Strategic Axis 1 deals with legal and institutional frameworks for girls and women's rights to education. The second axis deals with gender-sensitive teaching and learning environment. The third one deals with STEM education with a focus on TVET for girls and women. And the fourth one deals with advocacy and communication to ensure that we get more that more women and more girls and women are sensitized on the need to also explore into STEM field. So in order to tackle this, all the barriers that, girls and women still lack access and retention to educational systems due to persisting social norms, harmful and traditional practices like I earlier mentioned, ineffective policies, poor infrastructure, especially during conflicts and humanitarian situations. So in order to tackle these barriers that hinder girls and women education, the AU SAFA also is working in collaboration with the traditional and faith-based organizations around the AU member states, civil societies, and international partners to implement its programs and activities. It also has specific working relationship with UNESCO, UNICEF, and with some other countries, Plan International, Save the Children, the ADIA, and then the FAWEL. So the African continent, aware of the need for gender parity in all sectors and in line with its institutional reforms, took a bold step during its 30th Assembly of Heads of State and Government to adopt a decision geared towards the achievement of full gender parity in the institutions and organs of the AU. And that is why today we have, the top management, we have 5-5-5, ratio of 5-5, 5 men and 5 women who are chairpersons commissioner that are managing the African Union Commission. This decision provides a unique opportunity to positively and gradually shift the African Union to becoming a preferred employer of African women and families, while playing an exemplary role in prioritizing the interests and needs of female workers. Furthermore, the Pan-African University of the African Union was established with the objective to develop world-class graduate programs in science, technology, and innovation, and social sciences. 5 institutes were created focusing on basic sciences, technology, and innovation in Kenya, life and earth sciences in Nigeria, governance, humanities, and social sciences in Cameroon, water, energy, and climate change in Algeria, and space sciences in South Africa. A key principle of this program is gender equity at all levels and in all university functions. To date, we know the Pan-African University has produced over 1,000 graduates, and within the ratio of male to female, it's almost half-half. While these numbers, are indicative of the need to further boost guests' interest in enrolling into science-based programs, we think that the power exists to ensure that women are able to venture into male-dominated fields like the space sciences, which South Africa is hosting. The Commission of the African Union is also bridging gender gaps through its Kwame Nkrumah Award for Scientific Excellence, which is dedicated to the women. Since 2007, this program is set out to popularize science and technology among women. The award recognizes women's achievements in science and technology, but also to encourage more interest and participation of women in using science and technology for socioeconomic development, socioeconomic transformation, and promotion of Africa's integration priorities. This award is an annual event whereby 2 prizes, each of 2 prizes is given to each region at valued at $20,000 per winner. We also have the program at continental level, for which anyone can apply, whether men or women. It's open to everyone, and the cash prize for this continental one is $100,000 USD. Additionally to all the instruments that have been put in place by the African Union Commission, we have the Julius Nyerere Scholarship Scheme for postgraduate studies, and which is dedicated to women interested in sciences. Although continuous efforts are being made, you will agree with me that these are just a drop in the ocean in view of Africa's population, and so more intervention, scholarship, and support for women scientists or intending scientists in Africa are needed. Moving forward, the African Union is fully aware that investment in youth today will determine the development trajectory of Africa over the next decades. And so the chairperson of the African Union, His Excellency Faki Mohammed, in April 2019, launched out an initiative to reach out to 1 million African youths by 2021. This is with the aim of driving youth development agenda across the continent, spurring political action and commitment to invest in youth. The initiative targets 1 million young people through direct investment and essential game-changing interventions in 4 areas: education, entrepreneurship, employment, and engagement. The Commission believes that this initiative will respond to the fundamental questions on using new approaches to solving existing problems targeting African realities. The implementation of all these initiatives are ongoing, and our leaders have given themselves up to 2063 to see what progress we can make in the prosperity of Africa. Distinguished participants, with this insight on the trajectory of Africa we want to see in 2063, I want again to thank the organizers of this meeting for giving the African Union the opportunity to share its experiences and the efforts that is being made, to have an inclusive development in Africa. I thank you again, and over to Ellen. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Monica. We truly appreciate that. And thanks and welcome back, Roseanne. And thank you to everyone for such an engaging evening. We've seen all your responses to the questions that we posed to you, but you also posed questions to us. And now that Roseanne and I are here, Roseanne, if you haven't seen the questions, I will read out the questions and you can either respond or ask the other speakers for today to respond to the questions. I want to start with the one that I felt was rarely discussed, and I thought we could spend some time discussing that. So I'm reading this to you, Roseanne. Our recent global survey showed that 22% of African women in science have encountered sexual harassment. We don't talk about this in many countries. What can we do? Over to you, Roseanne.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if the survey that this participant is talking about is the Gender Gap in Science Survey, the ISC, the International Council for Science run survey. So yes, a very serious problem. And I think that underlying a lot of the problems that we've experienced with numbers and women's participation in science and technology is something that we've remained silent about for far too long: sexual harassment. And I recently heard a presentation where the person said that, you know, it's like an iceberg, and that the top part is the very small proportion of sort of overt sexual advances, of which there are relatively few. But underlying that is this huge iceberg underneath, about 75% of sexual harassment which occurs in a very different way, either through bullying or through harassment of some kind. It's not actual physical harassment, it's some other kind of harassment. So I think the time has come for us to really incorporate this and bring it into the whole discussion about why women are underrepresented in science and technology. And you know, just anecdotally, there can be many reasons why this is so important in science and technology, because women are working long hours in the labs, often after hours, and you know, so they are vulnerable to this kind of harassment. I do know that in some work that we did with fellowship holders that were studying in various African countries, these are postgraduate students, one of the biggest complaints they made was that it was the journey to and from the lab in the evenings that was holding them back in their work. They were afraid to work in their labs at night. So yeah, all important, and I think it has to be brought into the discussion about science.
Thanks very much, Roseanne. I will read the next question and you can decide who of the speakers can respond to this. It's from Elizabeth. What about addressing the gender cultural expectations per your slide, and I believe this was your slide, Roseanne, of women and men running a race? Can we ever advance in a big way without major cultural adjustment in terms of expectations regarding, for example, household or child raising expectations?
Yeah, huge problem. I mean, I've done some work where I've been speaking about this aspect with a lot of men in the audience. Unfortunately, it was face to face, so you get to see the reactions, and the reactions of some of the men in the audience are actually quite prehistoric, to put it mildly. And I think it's something we have to address. It's something that women have to learn to be more assertive and set boundaries in their own home environments, and know that they're not alone in this, that they're supported by their fellow women. I think it is changing amongst the younger generation, and we would really hope that policies in the institutions and organizations where people work can, you know, encourage women to be bold and to make sure that men understand this huge, this unfair load that women have carried for so long. Yeah.
Thanks, Roseanne. The next question was posed to Monica. So Monica, if you're there, you can unmute as I read your question. Science education is not only time consuming, but also expensive. How is policy responding to the fact that women in Africa face the double jeopardy of time poverty and income poverty, which limits their effective participation in science education? Over to you, Monica.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with that question. For instance, in my own case, while I was doing my PhD that was supposed to last for a maximum of 3 years took me 7 years to complete, because I had to, a combination of the research and also having to take care of my family. And of course, the funding I had for that PhD was only for 3 years. So for the rest 4 years, of course, I had to foot the bill. So to respond to that question, I would want to say that, I think it's high time that we created the awareness with our funding agencies that for women, it may take us a longer time. If they're going to fund us for research in sciences, it may take a longer time because we have other things that, we have to cope with. So my question directly is that, we need to create that awareness with our funding agencies, to try to consider the women, make a special case for women who want to veer into sciences. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Monica, and particularly for touching on funding, because when participants responded to the first question, they did highlight how critical funding is and making that also gender responsive. Over to you, Roseanne. There's a question here concerning gender equity and women and the workplace. When talking about gender equity, is it that women should be expecting special treatment in the workplace?
Well, I think as I explained, if we don't have gender equality, then we have to put in place mechanisms to ensure that there is going to be gender equality. And this is what means where equity comes into place. Sometimes we have to have programs that will support women to give them an opportunity to participate on an equal footing. At the moment, they come from such a historical disadvantage that it's not possible for them to do so. So I think, there's going to be a period where we will have special programs for women. But as I can remember, in South Africa, we have this Women in Science Awards evening. So we have a Science Awards evening where everyone can compete, but then we have a Women in Science one. And I can remember the Minister of Science and Technology saying, I hope there will come a day where there's no longer a need for this Women in Science event. And I think it's that we all hope we'll get to. But at the moment, we're not quite ready to do away with these special treatments that we need to give women.
Thanks, Roseanne, for that. Monica, the next question is posted to you. It's about monitoring and evaluation. How effective are the implementation of the late policies? And I believe these are the AU policies on women and gender. What percentage has been achieved? And this question is from Catherine. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Catherine. Unfortunately, I'm not a gender specialist, and we have a gender division in the African Union, so I may not be able to give you concretely, respond to your question. But I'm sure that, if you go to the AU website on the gender and gender directorate, you may be able to find the statistics you are looking for. But I know they have an outfit for monitoring and evaluation. In fact, all the programs of the African Union have monitoring and evaluation.
Could I just make a comment there, if I may? So I think that's a really critical question, because there's absolutely no doubt that the African Union has wonderful policies in place, very gender sensitive policies, and many of them. But it's the implementation that has not always been so great. And this might be something that the AAS could investigate or consider, you know, what are the barriers to the implementation of these policies in some countries? Why have some countries been successful and others not? And, you know, one would have hoped that there would have been a greater success rate with such good policies in place. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Roseanne. Yes, please.
To a larger extent, the African Union, we bring out the policies, you know, for the member states. We do not implement per se. Mostly we don't implement. We expect the member states and the partners to do the implementation. And most often, these policies are being adopted by our African heads of state with the commitment that the various member states will implement. But one thing we have realized, you know, along the years is the fact that, you know, we find a couple of countries saying, oh, but, you know, this we are not within our budget, you know, so we cannot implement because it was not structured within the budget. Well, gradually, you know, it takes them time, but with time, we see that, you know, they may not pick up immediately in implementation, but gradually, you know, they begin to pick up. And that is why in my department here, we have what we call the scoreboard, which every year we expect that, you know, each country should give us a narration of what they have achieved in line with the implementation of the strategies that we have within the department. And I think that is also what is going on with other departments of the African Union. They have a way of collecting data from the member states. I must tell you that, you know, the rate of implementation is not very, very great, but gradually people are picking up, member states are picking up, and our partners are supporting also in ensuring that, you know, these strategies are being implemented. It's a gradual process where we're getting there.
Thanks very much, Monica, and thanks to everyone. I would love to take all the questions that have been posted, and I've only selected a few of those, Roseanne. But what we are going to do with these questions is that they're going to inform the process that we are starting today of the prioritization work. And our colleagues will be looking into those questions and trying to see what answers we can find. So Roseanne, I want to hand over to you so that you can offer more feedback on the exercise and the process. And then you can hand over to the rest of the team. Over to you, Roseanne. And sorry, actually, we do need to receive the results of the questions that we post through Menti. So I'm not handing to you, Roseanne, but to Arlen and Olivia. Over to you, Arlen.
Thank you, Grace. Just a minute as Olivia shares her screen for all of us to see. We did ask questions on how important it is to engage men in the conversation. And we also asked questions on about what you think the priorities should be for AAS and what we should be concentrating on. And we are going to now share the results with you. And I'll just pick a few responses from each slide because we are now looking at the time and we do want to be able to move on. So what are the gaps in gender? Some of the responses: support for women or female scientists that don't have the luxury of family or salaries that can support caregivers. Some of the other responses are uptake by policymakers and consideration in policy making. Policy appears several times. Clearly, it is a very important thing. And then the pay gaps and the funding for women only. I think this, as has been highlighted by Roseanne, is still something we should be considering. Yes, women are not expecting to be treated specially, but they are extenuating circumstances that require women to be treated specially, particularly in the field of science. Olivia, if you could move to the next slide, please. So I think it is clear that it is very important for men to be engaged in the conversations. And this is something we are going to look into expanding our engagement with men. Olivia, next slide. So some of the reasons that you gave to your response to question 1, I like the reality response. That's very brief. Just be realistic. Gender, sorry, Olivia, you, just a minute. Some of the responses, oops, okay. Sorry, some technological challenges here. Yes, for gender balance, both sexes have to be involved for it to be successful. And I think this is also the response we saw on engaging men in the conversation. Gender in STI is not a women's issue. It's all our issue, and so many are, so men are an integral part of the conversation. Men also be influential and can be influential and powerful allies. We need their opinions on some of our engagement, and to promote the awareness of the gaps and enhance their buy-in to address these gaps. I think from the speakers, we've clearly understood that we do need this conversation to happen, and thank you all for responding to this question, because this does give us some insights on what we should be looking at. Next slide. On the focus areas, you mentioned support girl numbers along the pipeline, yes. Funding research that really seeks to bring to the fore. Olivia, just scroll up again. Sorry, I hadn't finished that. Yes, to bring to fore the nuances of gender in STI, and then supporting intersectional research. I think this is quite important, because then we do start understanding the intersectionality of gender and how to handle things like the norms, the cultures, and the perceptions of the people participating in science. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So we asked you to rank the responses you gave. What we did is, in the background, we tried to collect everything and put it in such a way that you could be able to rank. And these are the responses. There were quite many responses, but we selected only the 5 commonest responses. And I think they actually reflect your thoughts. Funding, policies, women leaders in STI and work-life balance, gender and digital divide, mentoring and role modeling. Next slide. And I think this is our second last slide. So on the question on what AS should be planning to make to kind of make equity or create equity in the gender and science space, share experiences of women scientists, and I think we did. We can say we are responding to that. You've seen the panel of speakers, and Monica did share her own experiences in her keynote address. It's important to keep telling these stories so that they are appreciated and the issues dealt with even the nuances that are in this, that hinder the progress of women, be addressed early on. And then the existing legal frameworks like Agenda 2063, yes, that's noted. And the last one from this slide is inclusivity and empowerment. These are both very broad concepts, but I think in the next stages, we will be able to ask you to tease out some of the suggestions you've made and give concise answers that we can act on. Next slide, Olivia. Yes, on the issue of stakeholders, we can see the biggest number said universities, government institutions, private sector, AUC, and many others that have formed this word cloud. We do appreciate your engagement, taking the time to really engage with us and give us your responses. Thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Rosiane for the next session before we close.
Okay, so thank you very much, Alan. We're fast approaching the witching hour, so I'm going to be very brief and hand over to our three final speakers to make some very, very brief closing remarks. Over to you, Isavani. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Roseanne, for leading us through those exercises, and Alan, Grace, and Olivia, and to that great personal story, and for giving us an update on the African Union and all of the other platforms that we could be using to engage regarding this. Just to say, regarding the priority setting exercise, just to say that following this, there will be a development of a white paper and policy briefs and engagement and advocacy to African governments in partnership with the African Union Development Agency and the African Union Commission. Without any further ado, I would like to now invite our Director of Programs and the leader of the AISA platform, the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, Tom Kariuki, and Catherine Ngila, who is the chairperson of the Education and Gender Scientific Committee of the African Academy of Science, but who's also stepped in currently as the acting director of at the African Academy of Sciences. Over to you, Tom and Catherine.
Do you want me to go first? Okay, thanks a lot. Can you hear me? Okay, I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Very briefly to say thank you everyone for a very good discussion over the last 2 hours. I'm here and I have followed all of this. I just want to make very quick points in closing to say that I do regard myself as somebody who is trying to champion what we are trying to achieve. And particularly at the African Academy of Sciences, we've been very keen to see what we need to do at the policy level, particularly as we go out to support researchers across the continent. How do we make sure that actually they are supported in the right way, in the right environment? Let me just make very quick areas where we want to see progress with institutions, particularly those ones that are receiving our support across the continent. One, we have asked many institutions to think about how they are going to entrench safeguarding. Safeguarding being the process of protecting individuals from abuse or neglect, whatever the gender they are with regard to the science that needs to happen. We want to make sure that they are doing the empowering of individuals that could be at risk, whether they are taking action that is not going to expose them, and that their mental health that may pose a risk to their own or someone else's safety. In which case, always asking them to act in a person his or her best interest. So that's one thing that I think that would go a long way in terms of safeguarding, and that's one area where we can also have policies around conflicts of interest, confidentiality, unconscious bias when we're making decisions for gender and science that actually are based not on our own personal deep-seated thought patterns, but really that are being driven by the right judgments and the right decisions. We are also asking institutions to really think about issues around, for example, flexible working policies. Both men and women should be given flexible working and career break options to enable them to pursue their research careers. As we move into supporting their research careers, we want them to be able to be included in, for example, return to work on part-time basis if they took part-time off, their career breaks when they need it, interruption of the research, they can be supported for that. They can also be supported with reduced working hours. So we are asking institutions to think about how do you then be fair to everyone across that working environment. A third area is where we are thinking about issues around policy on travel, subsistence, and visa, where we need special consideration to be provided, for example, to nursing mothers while they are attending meetings and conferences. This is something we have made as a policy for the African Academy of Sciences for anybody. And by the way, we have been very intentional as we bring almost parity of 50% between the two gender in recruitment of grantees and researchers. This policy has become very, very important, where grantees who are breastfeeding children under the 9 months are allowed to travel with their infants or for whatever other arrangements they have done. And that is working very well across many of our grantees. Another area we are asking institutions to really focus on is a question around bullying and harassment across many institutions, and making sure they have a policy. We have seen even in the media things that are very unpalatable that has emerged out of institutions where bullying and harassment, including sexual harassment, has become a major issue to be addressed. And then finally, I think we have also asked many institutions to think about all this area around maternity, paternity. I know some countries don't have paternity and adoption of and sick leave, but we are asking institutions to think about, do you have policies that actually then can be entitled to open to all individuals who can take leave while their salary is being funded. And we at the AES are actually funding for people who can take that leave for maternity, paternity, adoption, or sick leave. So just to say, finally, to say that we have all these policies at the level of the AES. We have an active agenda for inclusion across gender, across race, religion, language, and other parameters. We don't want to say we are treating special treatment, because nobody wants special treatment to any gender. What we all should be striving to do is to facilitate an even playing field, so that we actually then enable to have a healthy balance between career progression and what Roseanne referred to, the biological duties. As we have the primary caregivers and we have the private sphere and the social sphere that all of us need to play. And then finally, to say that we want to ensure that the cultural and the historical biases against women are eliminated, and that research environments accords everybody the dignity and the space to thrive and to make a very productive career in Africa. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you so much, Tom. Over to you, Prof. Nyela.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. No, thank you very much. I would like first to thank the organizers. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for all stakeholders, both men and women, to actually discuss the issues that affect the progress and success of women in the continent, particularly knowing that women, of course, the percentage population is quite high, and we can't afford to ignore women as partners sitting on the table to discuss policies as we look at the basically how we are going to progress in terms of as a continent and of course globally. I would like also to thank, so therefore my thanks go to the organizers, like I said, Grace, Maura, Olivia, Usura, Ellen, Alan, Isaivani for hosting us, Tom for wonderful, actually, very wonderful comments that you have made there that captures the essence of what really is affecting women in the continent, not just in a continent, but worldwide, because of these opportunities as looking at the competition between men and women when they were trying to reach, the goal there, you will realize that unless you are given as more tools actually to step on, it is very easy for you to miss to see what is beyond the border. So therefore, you need to be able to be enabled, and that enabling environment is what we are all talking about, because we know that women have got the ability. Of course, they have succeeded. Those who have been given the opportunities have shown. They have become trailblazers. So therefore, the question is then, why don't we have majority of women, leading, showing us the way in terms of STI? It's because of the lack of opportunity. And I've said this before, exposure, exposure, exposure. That is the key, so that you can be able to hold the hands of these women, young girls, show them role modeling is very, very important, and so forth and so on. So of course, our speakers, first our facilitator, Professor Hossein, thank you very much. I think you gave us a nice lecture looking at what are the terminologies, the definitions, because it's very, sometimes we confuse these issues, gender equity, gender equality, women empowerment, and so forth and so on. The minute you hear gender issues, you actually think about, oh, they're talking about women. Now women want to take over the world. So these are all misunderstandings, because I think people are really not, majority of the people are probably not very much aware exactly what are the issues. So when you gave us that framework and you gave us the concept, now we are able to understand what is happening. Of course, as the chair of the Gender and Education, or Education and Gender in the African Academy of Sciences, which is a scientific committee, we are looking at some of the issues. For example, we have to look at issues such as infrastructure, things like, do we have gender issues mainstreamed, in various areas, particularly in the STEM? Coming back to Kenya, I sit with the mentors, UNESCO mentors, that is headed by Dr. Alice Ochanda. I think she must be in this group. And so what we are doing right now is that we are saying that girls are seated at home. And we have seen numbers in Kenya that a high percentage of girls become pregnant. These are secondary school girls. Now, do you tell me, if they are getting pregnant at this stage, do you see themselves becoming professors or top scientists? No, unless, of course, we give them an enabling environment. That won't happen. And so therefore, as UNESCO mentors, we are looking at mitigation, sending videos and radios to reach as far as Turkana in Kenya. And so therefore, these are some of the mitigation mechanisms that one, and of course institutions, various institutions, whether NGOs or government, can put in place to ensure that this tool has been added, or more tools have been added for those who are actually struggling to see what is in front there. So with those few words, and I think there are many words, let me also thank Madam Kedes, because she set the scene for us. Obviously, the funding, the sponsorship from Bill and Melinda Gates. I like to say Melinda and Bill Gates because women first. Anyway, so Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, thank you very much for that wonderful setting that you have given us. Madam Edinoba from the EUC, looking at, of course, the framework that the African Union has, particularly STI 2024. I think what we are going to do as Academy of Sciences, we are going to look at the data that is in existence. First, look at the policies that were set, and we measure, using the monitoring and evaluation to see how much have we been able to achieve as countries. The awards that we talked about, particularly in South Africa, they are very good in awards. Can we also try to impress upon all governments in Africa to ensure that these awards are given across in all countries so that we can recognize the women who are doing well in STI? Colleagues, I think the time has come to me to say thank you all for all the delegates who have attended this, the panelists and the discussions that we have had. Thank you and have a good evening for those who are in Africa, and of course, those who are in Europe and elsewhere, have a good day. Thank you and God bless.